What if I told you that the emptiness you feel is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful call of your soul? What if the fear that paralyzes your every decision is not an enemy, but a hidden door to the life you've always sought? In this video inspired by Carl Jung's deep psychology, you will learn how suffering transforms into language, how the unconscious governs symbols, and why confronting your shadow is the only path to true existence. What you will hear here can radically change your perception of yourself and the world around you. Have you ever felt that even in a crowd, there is an emptiness inside you that demands to be filled? Perhaps right now, as you listen to these words, something within you quietly says, "I can't do this anymore." In such moments, most people try to drown their feelings with distractions, work, obligations, noise. But the moment comes when this noise can no longer hide the inner crack, and you begin to realize that the life you lead is not truly yours. At this threshold appears a calling that becomes not just a convenient choice, but an inevitability. Carl Jung warned that the greatest threat facing modern man lies not in external chaos, but in the unconscious adaptation to a life that does not belong to him. This existence, shaped by social expectations, hereditary obligations, and scripts written long before your birth. And it is this automatic adaptation that one day begins to fail. You wake up feeling like you are merely fulfilling a function, not living a real life. You smile in photographs, but your soul falls silent when the camera is turned off. You say everything is fine, but something important inside you is slowly dying. This discomfort is not a sign of weakness, but evidence of life, proof that your soul is still alive, even if your body continues to exist on autopilot. How many times have you thought that everything around you is just work, bills, submission, and endless repetitions? How many times have you realized that even among material goods, you lack something important? Jung called it the collapse of the ego, the moment when the mask created for survival begins to suffocate your true essence. But why do so many people ignore this call? Because it is too painful to acknowledge that the life you have built does not reflect the true essence of your existence. It's easier to keep pretending than to look inside oneself and accept the need for change. Many prefer to drown themselves in series, social media, and fleeting pleasures. But those who dare to hear the call of their soul understand that collapse is not the end, but a new beginning. Imagine yourself in a room where the air becomes increasingly thin. You breathe, but with each passing second, you feel a lack of oxygen. This is a metaphor for a life lived away from your true self. You can resist for a while, but sooner or later, your body will demand air, just as your soul demands authenticity. When this demand arises, it does not ask for permission and invades with a fierce roar, destroying everything that seemed safe. And so the first complex question arises before us. If everything you have today was built with such difficulty, why does it look so fragile? The answer, according to Jung, is simple and alarming. Because it is built on a foundation that does not belong to you. You have learned to seek stability, but not meaning. To seek recognition, but not truth. To seek acceptance, but not presence. This entire construct creates a life that may seem right, but actually eats away from within. Some see this emptiness as a sign of illness. However, Jung suggests looking at it differently. This is not a pathology, but an invitation. Emptiness is an open space for the new. Aspiration is the push that the unconscious gives when it realizes that your ego no longer hears its quiet whisper. That is why symptoms become stronger, pain intensifies, and the crisis reaches its climax. Not because you are weak, but because you are called to a new birth. How you respond to this call determines everything. Most people return to their cozy illusions. They take medication, buy something new, change their environment, but their essence remains untouched. And then, years later, they wonder why they still feel the same emptiness. Only a few dare to overcome the discomfort and understand that pain is a language, not a sentence. This crisis is a transition, not a condemnation. The loss of meaning is not an end, but a self-discovery. This is where the conflict lies. You were raised with the belief that stability is the pinnacle of life. Stable job, stable relationships, predictable daily routine. But Jung warns that such normalcy can be the most sophisticated form of imprisonment. The system rewards obedience with small distractions, minor pleasures that only touch the soul, and you begin to realize that you live like a functional zombie, working, consuming, repeating the same thing. But deep down, you understand that this is not life, but merely existence. At this moment, a second uncomfortable question arises. Do you live or merely exist? There is a vast difference between these concepts. Life demands presence, courage, and a connection to truth, while existence is just the experience of days until their end. If you are aware of this emptiness, it means your soul has already chosen life, otherwise you would not be here and would not hear these words. Jung described this moment as the beginning of individuation, when the soul refuses to remain under the control of the persona, the mask created for survival in the world. What you feel as despair, he saw as a harbinger of something greater. The call to stop being just a statistic and become a whole being is neither an easy nor a beautiful process. As he said, it is a plunge into the unconscious, where you will confront both light and darkness. And perhaps this is what scares me the most, the thought of meeting my own shadow. How many times have you avoided feeling, remembering, acknowledging your emotions? How many times have you preferred to distract yourself rather than deal with the memories that return in your dreams? Fear hides not only in external unknowns, but primarily in our inner reality. Carl Jung claimed that what we resist continues to exist. The more you try to ignore your fears, the stronger the pain becomes. What if instead of running away, you decide to face your fears? What will happen if you take a step towards what you have always avoided? This is the question Jung leaves us with. The path to freedom leads not outward, but inward. This transition is not into the surrounding world, but into one's own unconscious. And here comes a turning point. Everything you consider a failure can become the beginning of your awakening. Everything you perceive as weakness can actually be the strength your subconscious gathers to push you to a new stage. What seems like destruction may turn out to be a foundation. What you see as loss can become a birth. What seems like an end may only be a beginning. But here's the twist. What if the life you lead was never truly yours? What if your calling is not just to change course, but to finally write your own story? Have you ever contemplated that your suffering might not be a mistake, but something greater? What if your pain is not just an annoying inconvenience, but a language through which your soul tries to communicate with you? Jung claimed that the unconscious never remains silent. It always communicates, but in the language of symbols. When you ignore the subtlest signs, anxious dreams, inexplicable fatigue, emotional crises, the unconscious amplifies its signals. What was once merely discomfort turns into a state of despair. From an early age, we are taught to see pain as a synonym for failure. If you are sad, something went wrong. If you feel empty, you haven't tried hard enough. If life has lost its colors, you are not strong. But such an interpretation limits us and is cruel. Jung suggests looking at suffering from another perspective. It is the most honest way for the soul to say that change is needed. It is not punishment, but a language. It is not weakness, but strength expressed as a signal. Consider your body. Physical pain indicates that something requires attention. A high temperature is not an illness, but a signal that the body is facing difficulties. Similarly, emotional pain is not a sign of weakness, but rather a warning that the psyche is trying to restructure. And so the question arises, why do we learn to suppress that part of ourselves which persistently tries to save us? Jung believed that the greatest tragedy of modernity lies not in self-suffering, but in how we cope with it. We strive to get rid of pain, to mute or hide it, although in reality, it is our most accurate guide. It's like being in a house engulfed in flames, and instead of looking for an exit, we try to turn off the alarm that annoys us with its sound. This is how we act when we refuse to listen to our feelings. But there is something deeper. Pain is not just a signal of a problem. It carries the seed of a solution. Carl Jung argued that symptoms are not enemies to be destroyed, but paths worth exploring. Anxiety, apathy, emptiness. Each of these states is a symbolic passage. The question is whether you will evade them or confront them. Imagine a situation where a person seemingly has everything. He has a stable job, perfect relationships, trips captured in beautiful photographs. On the outside, it looks like a wonderful life, but inside, this person feels suffocated. He wakes up without the desire to act, constantly watches the clock, and feels an invisible weight on his chest. How to explain this contradiction? Jung would say it is the result of a clash between the persona and the self. The persona is a mask created for successful functioning in society, while the self is our true essence. When the distance between them becomes unbearable, suffering arises. Here lies a micro-conflict. The outer world admires your persona, while your inner self calls for authenticity. You should feel the fullness of life, but in reality, you experience emptiness. This contradiction consumes you. Many of us live in this space between the admiration of others and the apathy of our souls. Suffering, according to Jung, is also an educational process. It teaches us through what we most try to avoid. It is in the void that we begin to realize the importance of meaning. In anxiety, we realize how much we need inner silence. In suffering, we understand that our decisions do not reflect who we truly are. This is not just a coincidence. It is a coded message. And here arises an important question. If you see only an enemy in suffering, are you not thereby destroying the messenger who came to save you? Recall instances in your life when something inexplicable happened. A book that appeared when you needed it most. A conversation with a stranger that seemed written just for you. A song that perfectly conveyed your feelings. For the young, it was not just a coincidence. It was synchronicity. Communication with the unconscious through symbols that arise at the right moment. Suffering reveals your sensitivity, and you begin to perceive these signs. Without pain, you would sleep, but with pain, you begin to see what was once hidden. However, there is one problem. We live in a culture that fears pain. We seek instant relief. We cannot stop and listen to what causes us suffering. That is why so many people miss opportunities to change themselves, exchanging the chance to find themselves for quick distractions, working more than necessary. The more we consume, the more we face information leaks. But, as Jung noted, what we resist persists. The more we try to suppress our feelings, the louder the pain sounds. A new micro-conflict arises. Are you truly seeking healing or just trying to silence yourself? There is a tangible difference between these two paths. By muffling the pain, you are only postponing the encounter with the truth. Healing is a journey through suffering. The question is whether you have the courage to endure these trials. Suffering also reveals the illusions of normalcy. What we call a stable life is often just a mask hiding the true state. Work that destroys the soul but provides financial stability. Relationships devoid of love but without judgment. A mechanical routine that ensures social recognition. When suffering comes, it tears off these masks and reveals the true cost of every choice. The question is, are you willing to pay the price for authenticity, or will you continue to pay for lies? Jung claimed that an unlived life is a disease one can die from. This simple yet destructive phrase makes one ponder. How many people slowly fade away, each day refusing to live the life they truly dream of? How many times have you felt that you simply exist, not touching the profound meaning of your path? And here arises the question, why does the unconscious choose suffering as its primary language? The young sailor believed that nothing captures attention like pain. If you do not hear the whisper, the unconscious begins to scream. Pain does not tolerate indifference. It demands a reaction. Therefore, paradoxically, pain can be seen as a gift, even if it is wrapped in darkness. Now stop and ask yourself, what pain are you trying to avoid today? Loneliness, lack of purpose, a feeling of invisibility? What if instead of running away from it, you decided to listen to its message? What is it trying to tell you? Perhaps it is this question that opens the door to transformation. But there is also a danger, confusing suffering with identity. You are not your pain. Your pain is merely a message. The risk is that you may become so attached to it that it becomes a part of you. The young emphasized that the goal is not to remain in suffering, but to pass through it until it becomes wisdom. This is why so many people get stuck. Instead of using pain as a bridge, they make it their home. Here we approach the central conflict of this section. Suffering can be both a prison and a liberation. The same experience that destroys one can awaken another. The difference lies in how you perceive this symbol. Is your pain the end of your story or the beginning of a new narrative? And here we approach a decisive moment. If suffering is a language, you must learn to translate it. But do not expect an easy translation. The unconscious speaks not in direct sentences, but in symbols and images. The heat of the body is measured in degrees, while the heat of the soul is measured in symbols. Ignoring the problem means living in ignorance. Acceptance is the first step toward awareness. And now imagine an unexpected turn. What if your deepest pain is not just a sign of a problem, but a gateway to the greatest encounter of your life, an encounter with yourself. Have you ever wondered why, at the moment you are ready to change your life, fear suddenly increases, as if an invisible force tries to pull you back to your comfort zone as you approach transformation? Carl Jung described this as a confrontation with the inner dragon, an archetype that embodies all the ego's resistance to the unknown. This is not an external dragon, but an internal one, woven from doubts, painful memories, guilt, fears, and voices that tell you that you won't cope. This dragon does not manifest when you live on autopilot. It appears precisely at the moment you decide to change. When you are about to end relationships that no longer bring joy or leave a job that destroys your soul, a dragon awakens and starts to roar. He paints before you pictures of possible failures, amplifying your fears, and you can't help but wonder, will I be able to handle this battle? Interestingly, Jung considered this dragon not an enemy to be destroyed, but a guardian of the portal to true life. The fear you experience is proof that you are exactly where you need to be. If there were no obstacles, there would be no fierce resistance. It's as if the subconscious places guardians on the path to transformation to test your courage. And here arises the first question. Are you fighting the dragon or yourself? How many times have you felt you are giving up something significant? Not because it is impossible, but because anxiety paralyzes you. How many projects have you left unfinished because your mind told you they wouldn't work? How many times have you trusted your fear more than your desire? This is where the dragon is active, not outside, but within you. It uses your own voice against you. Now think, why does fear seem so real? Most of the time it is based on projections that have not yet occurred. For the subconscious, symbols and images carry the same weight as reality. When you imagine failure, your body reacts as if it has already happened. When thinking of defeat, you already feel a sense of loss. Thus, even before you take a step, you have already lost. The question is, how long will you allow the dragon to fight with the weapons you have provided it? The young man claimed that the first step to overcoming this battle is to recognize the dragon as part of oneself. It is not an external monster, but a projection of your own shadow, the accumulation of everything you have avoided. Hidden traumas, old rejections, criticism you silently swallowed, guilt you never acknowledged. All of this does not disappear. It remains in the unconscious, waiting for the moment of manifestation. And when you decide to change, it appears in full force. But does meeting this dragon mean your demise or, on the contrary, integration? Here, it is impossible to avoid breaking the mold. What if what you fear the most is actually what you need? Imagine that the horror that paralyzes you is actually the key to the door you seek. This may seem paradoxical, but it is precisely this paradox that Jung often explored. The psyche develops not linearly, but through the tension of opposites. What you reject contains the same energy that can heal you. What if that is why your anxiety intensifies when you strive for change? Fear says, stop, pay attention. It doesn't seek to expel you, but warns that you've reached the limit of your self. It's uncomfortable, but it's also a signal. The problem is that we learn to interpret any fear as a warning of danger, although this is not always the case. Sometimes fear simply indicates that we are stepping out of the familiar. How many times have you returned to a toxic situation just because it was familiar? How many times have you stayed where you didn't want to be because you knew how to cope with that pain? The dragon feeds on the familiar. He would prefer that you continue to endure familiar pain rather than risk confronting the unknown that could set you free. But what is more dangerous, constant suffering or temporary fear to break through? Jung described this process as a descent into a symbolic hell, not to condemn oneself, but to reclaim forgotten parts of oneself. Every painful memory, every failure, every shame you tried to bury is part of your shadow. And the shadow cannot simply be eliminated. It must be integrated. The dragon is the embodiment of this shadow. The more you run from it, the more it grows. The more you face it, the more human it becomes. But are you ready to look the dragon in the eyes and acknowledge that it is made of pieces of you? Imagine a dream where you are being chased. The harder you run, the more relentless the chase becomes. But at some point, you can stop and realize that you were running from yourself. The same happens with the dragon. It will pursue you as long as you run, but it will become your guide when you face it. Have you ever wondered that what paralyzes you might deep down be trying to guide you? Society teaches us that strength is the absence of fear. But Jung refutes this idea. For him, courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. This is the dragon's realization, a tremor before it, yet a step forward, because each step is a confirmation that your soul is more valuable than its prison. And here is the question that breaks stereotypes. You confuse safety with submission, while the dragon screams, calling you back. But what if instead of returning, you decide to cross it? What will happen in your life if for a moment you trust your inner calling rather than its shadows? This crossing separates those who remain in one place, their whole lives, from those who dare to seek their true essence. And so we approach the decisive moment. The battle with the dragon occurs not only on a personal level, but also collectively. Confronting your fears, you challenge the system that profits from your submission. Society prefers that you lead a predictable, monotonous, and colorless life. When you decide to change yourself, you become dangerous not only to yourself but also to the structures dependent on your obedience. Perhaps that is why fear intensifies. Not only because you challenge your subconscious, but also because you silently challenge society as a whole. Therefore, Jung claimed that individuation is a true revolution. It is not just an inner journey. This is an act of breaking away from inherited patterns imposed by histories and hidden norms. To confront the dragon means to declare, I will not live as a statistical value. I will live as a unique being. However, the question remains, are you ready to accept the consequences of your individuality? It is here that the tension rises. Meeting the dragon does not mean that everything on the other side will be easy. On the contrary, it implies a rejection of certainty, a rejection of familiar boundaries and artificial safety. But it also means living meaningfully, even without any guarantees. What do you prefer? Empty safety or meaningful freedom? With each step, you begin to understand that the dragon is not as invincible as it seemed. It weakens as you grow. It loses power when you embrace your true essence. And then comes the revelation. The dragon is not here to destroy you, but to test your resolve. This mirror asks how far you are willing to go to not betray yourself. And it is at this moment that everything changes. Because when facing a dragon, you realize it doesn't need to be killed. It must be integrated. You must acknowledge it as part of your psyche. It was not an enemy, but a protector. And when you accept it, it becomes your ally. What once frightened you transforms into strength. What was once a prison becomes a passage. And here is the twist. What if the dragon you fear is not an obstacle in your way, but the very door you need to pass through? Have you ever noticed how from childhood, we were taught to wait for someone to come and save us? As children, we hoped that our parents would dispel our fears. Teachers would show us the right path, and authoritative figures would provide the final answer. This habit does not disappear with age. Many adults still wait for an external savior, a boss who will appreciate their work, a partner who will fill their inner void, or a society that will become just. Life persistently reminds us that expectations are often in vain. Carl Jung was right in asserting that the process of individuation cannot be followed in someone else's footsteps. Each of us must walk our unique path. The responsibility that so many try to avoid is actually the beginning of true freedom. According to recent studies, more than 70% of people worldwide believe their happiness depends on external circumstances, relationships, societal recognition, financial stability. These figures highlight how we tend to delegate the care of our own well-being. However, there is a less comforting truth hidden in this data. Only about 20% of people claim to be completely satisfied with their lives. What lies behind such a difference? The young man could explain this, as most people expect others to complete what can only be achieved through inner effort. Let me tell you a story. Victor, a man in his 40s, worked at a large company and was considered successful, but inside him reigned emptiness. Life seemed like a series of meaningless duties. For years, he waited for his boss to appreciate his work, for his wife to notice his fatigue, for life to suddenly bring the meaning he sought. But the acknowledgement never came. His wife didn't notice, and life gave him no answers. Everything changed when Victor realized that no one would come to his aid. He quit his job, faced his fears, and started his own business, following his true beliefs. He lost his familiar stability but gained a true life. This story is not unique, but it illustrates an important point. The saving power came not from outside. everything changed the moment he took responsibility for his fate. Now think about yourself. How many times have you found yourself in difficult situations, waiting for some external changes? How many years have you spent waiting for someone to act differently, for the system to become more favorable, for fate to smile upon you? This waiting seems comfortable as it creates the illusion of innocence. However, it also traps you in a cage of inaction. And here arises the question that makes you ponder. How long will you wait for someone who will never come? Jung reminds us that taking responsibility for our lives does not mean self-punishment for past mistakes, but recognizing ourselves as active participants in our destiny from this moment. Trauma may have occurred without your involvement, but healing is your choice. Rejection may not have been your fault, but recovery is your responsibility. This perspective may seem harsh, but it also liberates you. For relying only on yourself, you find that you no longer need to wait. A study conducted by the American Psychological Association showed that people who actively take responsibility for their decisions have a higher level of psychological well-being, even in difficult situations. This indicates that it is the feeling of autonomy, rather than external circumstances, that contributes to resilience. Interestingly, even in crisis moments, those who recognize their personal responsibility suffer less than those who remain in a victim position. Modern scientific research confirms Carl Jung's words. The psyche cannot endure long periods of passivity. It demands movement, decision-making, and action. But why do so many people resist this call? Accepting responsibility implies giving up excuses, and we love to make excuses. We gladly blame our childhood, the government, partners, and fate. These stories make our lives easier, but at the same time hinder our development. Our soul realizes this, which is why it persistently provokes crises until we understand that breaking free from external circumstances is impossible. The path always leads inward. Have you ever wondered how the system we live in profits from your passivity? Entire industries profit from your waiting. Companies offer miraculous solutions, quick courses, and promises of instant happiness. As long as you believe that you need something external for salvation, you continue to consume, obey, and wait. Jung called this a collective trap, a structure that alienates a person from themselves to make it easier to control them. And here arises another question. Can the resistance to accepting responsibility be not only an individual, but also a cultural phenomenon? Imagine for a moment that everyone decides to take full control of their lives. What will happen to the system that depends on your dependency? How will relationships based on subordination change, work built on obedience, religions founded on fear? The world will tremble. Thus, accepting responsibility is not just a personal step, but a true revolution. But let us pay attention to another interesting fact. Research shows that over 85% of people work in positions they are not truly interested in. They stay in their jobs because it is safer and more convenient, while silently suffering from anxiety, depression, and exhaustion. The World Health Organization predicts that by 2030, depression will become the leading cause of disability worldwide. These figures are not just medical, they symbolize the price humanity pays for living someone else's life. We fall ill not by chance, but due to our unwillingness to follow our own path. And here is the question to ask. Does your pain not reflect the life you continue to outsource? How many times have you thought, when I have more money, I will be happy, or when this person changes, everything will be fine? This is the logic of a trap. Life does not wait. Transformation begins not with those around you, but with yourself. Let me tell you another story. 35-year-old Helena had always dreamed of becoming an artist, but chose a career in law as it was more prestigious. She worked hard, achieved high positions, but felt an inner emptiness. One day, after a long and hard day at work, she collapsed on the living room floor crying. In that moment, it became clear to her that no one would come to her aid, neither family, nor money, nor status. She faced a choice: to rise and risk change, or to spend the rest of her life in despair. Helena decided to leave everything behind. She lost friends, faced criticism, and encountered many difficulties. But now, as she paints, she feels like she can finally breathe. The question is whether you have the courage like Helena. At this moment, your subconscious demands that you make a decision. Either take responsibility for your life or remain a secondary character in someone else's script. The paradox of responsibility is that it can be frightening, but it is precisely what gives you strength. Without responsibility, you become a victim of circumstances. With it, even feeling fear, you begin to move forward. But how to cope with the loneliness that envelops you when you realize you are alone? Jung said that true maturity is to experience the dark night of the soul, when you feel that no one is around. This emptiness can be frightening, but it is also fruitful. It is in silence that you discover strengths within yourself that you never even suspected. In the absence of guarantees, you learn to trust something deeper than mere safety. Meaning. Here's an interesting fact. Studies in neuroscience show that in people who take responsibility for their actions, areas of the brain associated with creativity and resilience are activated. In other words, when you decide to act, your brain begins to function differently, opening new horizons. Science confirms Jung's intuitive thoughts. The psyche responds to courage by expanding possibilities. But what happens when you fully embrace this responsibility? Life will stop being a rehearsal and become a real stage. There will be no excuses, no spectators to judge you. Every step you take, every fall, and every victory will belong only to you. It is frightening, but also liberating, as deep down you never wanted to live someone else's life. You always sought your own. And the final question to this excerpt: are you ready to pay the price of freedom? Freedom is not the absence of restrictions, but the ability to choose them yourself. This means you need to stop living as a victim and start acting as an initiator. It's difficult, but it's true. It can be lonely, but it's true. And here's the plot twist. What if, by taking on the responsibility you feared, you find out you were never alone? At the moment you decide to act, your inner strengths and symbols of the subconscious begin to unite to support you. Perhaps the savior you were searching for did not come from outside, because he has always lived within you. Have you ever wondered how fear intensifies when we stand on the brink of changes that separate our familiar life from the one we dream of? It manifests at the most unexpected moments, when everything seems unchanged, and as soon as you dare to think about change, a scream echoes inside you. Don't leave. It's too risky. This is the paradox of fear. It arises not because you are on the wrong path, but because you are finally approaching the right one. Carl Jung said that fear is the last barrier on the way to the deepest essence of yourself, to your true nature. When you feel paralyzed before an important decision, it's not just due to the fear of risks. Your subconscious brings to the surface all the images of danger that you have accumulated throughout your life. Remember how many times in childhood you were told not to take risks, not to speak too much, not to dream too boldly? Those voices still echo and merge with the chorus of your fear. But is fear really your true enemy, or is it just a reflection of what you must go through? Imagine a person who has spent years in toxic relationships but still hesitates to leave. The fear is not in the suffering, as they already endure pain daily. The fear lies in facing the unknown, coping with loneliness, and confronting the opinions of others. Interestingly, this fear does not protect, but paralyzes. Here occurs the first rupture of the template. It is not pain that immobilizes us, but the familiar environment. We prefer known pain to the freedom that can be frightening. The question is, how long will you tolerate life in a cage, having the key inside? The Jung warned that the persona, the mask we wear for survival in society, ultimately becomes a prison when we confuse it with the fullness of life. It can serve as protection, but when the soul seeks expansion, the persona begins to bind, and fear becomes this prison. He whispers for you to stay safe inside, but in reality, you are losing precious years trying to maintain an identity that is no longer your true self. Scientific research confirms Jung's intuition. Neurobiological studies show that the human brain is programmed to prefer the familiar, even if it is painful. The unknown, which could be liberating, is frightening. This explains why so many people remain in hated jobs, destructive relationships, and suffocating routines. The fear here is not so much biological as it is symbolic, representing a clash between visible and authentic life. And the most amazing thing is, the same areas of the brain that activate in real threats are also engaged when contemplating significant changes. In other words, for the psyche, changes can be just as frightening as encountering a predator. But does this mean we should succumb to fear? On the contrary, Jung argued that true development is only possible when we confront what frightens us the most. It's not about getting rid of fear, but about overcoming it. Fear does not disappear by itself. It dissolves in courage. Every time you overcome it, you begin to realize that the monsters are not as frightening as they once seemed. Moreover, you understand that it is fear that guards your treasure. It resembles ancient legends where a dragon guards gold. The gold of your soul is always protected by fear. The question is, are you ready to meet him face to face? Look at your life now. How many opportunities have you missed because of fear? How many times did you fail to express your feelings, stand up for your beliefs, and achieve what you wanted because you doubted yourself? It's a vicious circle. Every time you give in to fear, you strengthen its power. But every time you confront it, you weaken its tyranny. How many years will it take for you to realize that real life begins only on the other side of fear? Let me tell you a story. 32-year-old Laura dreamed of a life abroad. She studied languages for years, saved money, and imagined living in another place. But every time an opportunity arose, fear grew louder. What if it doesn't work out? What if I can't find a job? What if I fail? Every time she retreated, disappointment grew until she realized it was not life holding her back, but her own fears. She decided to leave despite her worries. In the first month, she cried every day. By the second, she began to adjust. On the third, she found a job. Now looking back, she realizes that the dragon was just smoke. The fear seemed real, but it existed only until she crossed the line. This example leads us to an important reflection. Isn't fear merely a projection of what you do not yet know? It does not reflect reality, but only its illusions. How many times have you worried about scenarios that never came to pass? How much time have you spent imagining the worst outcomes, only to find that none of it happened? Fear is a fiction masquerading as reality. The question is, how long will you allow this fiction to control your life? Jung also said that fear is a language of symbols. He points to the shadows, to those aspects of you that you avoid. He shows the feelings you don't want to feel, the memories you don't want to recall. Every time fear arises, it signals a part of you that is not yet integrated. It is no coincidence that the strongest fears are linked to feelings of rejection, abandonment, and loss of control. They touch the deepest wounds of the soul. Therefore, by overcoming them, you get closer to your true self. But why is it so difficult to cross this boundary? Because we were taught to think that safety is more important than meaning. From an early age, we hear phrases like, "Don't take too many risks." When contemplating stability, it's worth remembering, do what is right, but for whom? Society offers a standardized path and calls it safe, yet this path does not guarantee happiness. It only ensures awareness. Here arises the question, what do you prefer? A predictable, soulless life, or a real one full of uncertainty? Surprisingly, fear sometimes becomes your ally. People who have experienced serious trauma claim that it was fear that led them to the most important lessons. A study conducted by Harvard University showed that more than 60% of participants who experienced extreme situations reported finding a new meaning in life after overcoming their greatest fears. This supports Carl Jung's ideas. Fear is a portal. He does not speak of the need to stop, but points out that you have encountered something significant. And here is the inevitable question. What lies beyond fear? The answer is not simple, as it is different for everyone. For some, it is freedom in real relationships. For others, the courage to change professions. For many, it's just the opportunity to breathe without a mask. But in any case, it's life. Beyond fear lies a life that belongs to you. Remember the metaphor of the dragon. It scares, terrifies, and paralyzes. But when you face her, you realize that the treasure she guards is yourself. The gold is not outside, it is within. It is your authenticity, your integrity, your freedom to be yourself. And so the question arises that shatters familiar patterns. Do you not guard your treasure behind the walls you have built? The paradox is that no one is ever fully prepared for the transition. Do not wait for fear to disappear before you start acting. You must act despite it. The young man said that courage appears at the moment of meeting the shadow. The question is not in the absence of fear, but in devotion to the truth. You do not need guarantees. You only need the readiness to take the next step. Perhaps this is the main secret. Fear has never been a sentence. It has always been an invitation. It is not the size of fear that paralyzes you, but your unwillingness to go through it. With each step, you discover that fear diminishes. With each accepted truth, you realize it is not so unshakable. Life begins to expand when fear loses its grip. And now, we approach a decisive moment. If fear is terrible, it also opens new horizons. It points to a path that is not on the map. Just pay attention. Where your greatest fear lies, there is your true calling. That's why many try to avoid this confrontation, as they understand that overcoming it will change their lives forever. And here lies the twist. What if what you fear the most today will not destroy you, but set you free? What if the fear you desperately avoid is actually a secret door to the life you have always sought? And here, we have reached the point where all the truths we have known so far converge in one place. There comes a moment when you need to decide what you will do with this. It is not enough to intellectually grasp the essence of the soul, the language of suffering, the presence of the dragon, or the power capable of overcoming fear. You must transform this understanding into action. Here, many face difficulties because the mind seeks to continue thinking, while life demands concrete steps. Carl Jung insisted that enlightenment does not come from imagining bright images, but from realizing one's theme. This means that nothing will change just because you understood something. True change begins when you act according to your understanding. Look at your life at this moment. How many times have you promised yourself to change something, only to return to old habits? How many times have you told yourself that you would no longer tolerate a certain situation, but then retreated, gripped by fear? This is not a sign of weak character, but a lack of clear strategy. You need a plan that turns inspiration into concrete actions. This is what we will create together. A step-by-step plan, simple yet effective. The first step is to identify your problem. Clearly articulate which aspect of your life is causing you the most suffering right now. Do not try to be an optimist. Do not hide the truth. Be honest with yourself. It could be, my job exhausts me. My relationships drain me. Or, I live in fear of disappointment. By saying this, you give shape to the invisible. The youth said that everything left unconscious returns as fate. By recording your experiences, you bring pain to light. The second step is to create small, sincere rituals. Do not expect big changes to happen instantly. Transformation begins with small decisions. Every day, ask yourself, what can I do today to get closer to my true self? This could be giving up something that no longer brings joy, or dedicating 10 minutes to a personal project. It could also be an hour of disconnecting from things that paralyze you. Small rituals create a symbolic space that gradually alters your psyche. The third step is to meet your shadow. Choose a specific fear and write down what it tells you. Then respond to it as if communicating with a real person. This symbolic exercise, common in Jungian approaches, helps realize that fear is not absolute. It is merely a part of you. During the conversation, you integrate these feelings instead of fleeing from them. The fourth step is to find like-minded individuals on your journey. It's not about waiting for someone to save you, but about sharing the process with those who also strive for authenticity. This could be a group, a friend, or a community. Psychological studies show that people who share their goals with trusted ones achieve them 65% more often. Individualization is a personal journey, but it doesn't have to be lonely. The fifth step is to write down symbols. Jung reminded us that the unconscious communicates with us through images. Start recording your dreams. Pay attention to recurring symbols in your daily life. Listen to the words of songs and encounters that seem random. This is not just a coincidence. It is synchronicity, the language through which your psyche guides you. The more you observe, the clearer it becomes that you are not lost. You are on the right path. At the sixth stage, take a concrete step. No transformation occurs solely on a symbolic level. Choose a practical solution that reflects your path. This could be the completion of a cycle that has run its course, the beginning of a new endeavor you have delayed, or a change in a destructive habit. It doesn't matter how small the step is. The main thing is that it is tangible and indisputable. This step will be your contract with yourself. These 6 steps are not magical formulas. They are an invitation to build a bridge between what you know and what you feel, day by day. But the main question is, are you ready to practice, or do you prefer just to think? Knowledge that is not put into action becomes a burden, and actions, even the smallest, open the path to freedom. Now imagine what your life will be like in 6 months. If you truly apply these steps, I am not talking about perfection, but about progress. Imagine waking up feeling more connected to what matters. Picture looking back and realizing you have overcome the fear that seemed insurmountable. Imagine that you take pride not in everything being perfect, but in finally living according to your truth. This is a vision, not a fantasy. It can begin today. But here is the question. What can stop you on this path? Fear, hesitation, self-sabotage are the same dragons we've faced before, but now you have a map to help navigate. You understand that fear is not a sign of mistake, but evidence of closeness to your true self. You realize that pain is not weakness, but a language. And you know that no one will come to save you because the Savior is already within you. Now let me share an amazing fact with you. Recent studies show that 95% of people consuming self-discovery content never apply the knowledge gained in practice. Only 5% turn thoughts into actions. This means that most people get stuck not due to lack of information, but due to inaction. The question is simple. Which group do you belong to? It's time to break the usual pattern. Perhaps you have been inspired, reflected, and moved until now. But now you must decide whether to act or remain on the sidelines. For those who awaken are distinguished not so much by understanding as by the decision to live in accordance with that understanding. And now we approach an emotional moment. Perhaps you are tired of numerous unfulfilled promises and failed attempts. Maybe you are already disappointed in yourself for not being able to change earlier. Look at yourself with understanding. Everything you have done until this moment has been based on your skills. Now you possess new knowledge. In your hands are tools, symbols, and strategies. The past no longer defines your future. The decision you make today could be a turning point in your life. Imagine leaving a comment, even anonymously. I choose to cross the border. It may seem simple, but there is strength in it. You assert, you take a step, you commit. Don't write to me, write to yourself. This could be your first conscious step to a new stage. And here is the climax. What if everything you sought externally, approval, security, meaning, never actually existed? What if it had always been within you, just waiting for the moment you gather the courage to declare it? Perhaps the greatest discovery is not in finding something new, but in realizing you have always been the one you were searching for. If these words touched your heart and ignited a spark of courage within you, act immediately. Share your experiences, doubts, and fears. You can do this anonymously. It's important for your words to be heard, as every written word is a step toward your transformation. This is just the beginning. The next chapter of your life is ready, but only you can write it.